You're listening to the Valley Current.
And I just want you to put yourself in the mindset of where we all were just 24 hours ago.
Yeah, it was tense, to say the least.
Totally. I mean, yesterday, we were standing right at the edge of the abyss. We all saw that social media post from former President Trump.
Right.
The explicit threat that the entirety of Iran's civilian power grid was going to be, annihilated.
Yeah, just wiped out.
Exactly. And you were probably looking at the clock, watching the news cycle spin completely out of control, just waiting for the lights to go out on millions of people.
Waiting for hospitals to go dark, water purification systems to shut down. I mean, we were looking at a civilization-level blackout.
And then the sudden whiplash-inducing pivot. Just 90 minutes before that 8:00 p.m. deadline, they announced an unexpected 2-week ceasefire.
Which is wild because 90 minutes is, it's an imperceptible margin in diplomacy.
Yeah, it's nothing.
You were talking about the difference between a devastating, irreversible escalation and, a fragile, temporary pause in a war that has already completely altered the map of the Middle East.
Right. Everything just pivoted on a dime with less than 2 hours on the clock.
It truly underscores the razor-thin margins of error we are operating within right now. We're literally watching modern history unfold with a stopwatch.
And that stopwatch is exactly what we are focusing on today. We're doing a deep dive into a single, highly detailed source document that's on the table to help us navigate this.
Yeah, it's a fascinating document.
It's a special geopolitical and diplomatic report authored by Russo at the Computer Law Group. It's titled Operation Epic Fury Week 6.
Right.
So our mission today is to untangle this immense diplomatic mapping, lay out the, frankly, completely conflicting peace plans currently sitting on a table in Islamabad, and try to figure out how a massive global conflict might be resolved in an 8-day window.
Yeah, and if anyone listening is tempted to think of this as like a fascinating but abstract academic exercise about a conflict halfway across the world, we need to shatter that illusion immediately.
Absolutely. The stakes are huge.
Right. The real-world consequences are bleeding into our daily lives right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the Strait of Hormuz, which is the most critical maritime choke point on the planet, is effectively closed.
Wow.
And because of that closure, oil has spiked to a staggering $170 a barrel.
Which is insane because before this conflict started, what was it, like sitting around $67?
Exactly. We are looking at roughly 15 million barrels of crude oil a day simply blocked from entering the global market.
15 million barrels a day. I mean, when you subtract that volume from the global energy grid, the math becomes terrifying very quickly.
Yeah, cascades into everything.
Right. Like when the U.S. demands zero uranium enrichment, you might be thinking, well, why don't we just take the uranium from them?
Right. Just go in and grab it.
Yeah. But as we'll see today, physically removing it is basically asking a sovereign nation to hand over its crown jewels on live television.
Which they will never do.
Right. And until they do, those 15 million barrels stay locked up. So those economic shockwaves are hitting your wallet right this very second.
Oh, absolutely.
The cost of fuel to get to work, maritime shipping, the cascading inflationary effect on global supply chains. This localized war has levied an immediate tax on the entire planet.
And that is before we even touch on the World Food Programme's terrifying projections about global hunger if this energy crisis continues.
Yeah, we'll get into that. The stakes for figuring out this diplomatic puzzle aren't just about regional lines on a map.
Yeah.
They are about the baseline functioning of the global economy.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. We survived the 90-minute countdown yesterday, but Russo's analysis makes it clear that we didn't escape the pressure cooker, right? We just swapped one timer for 2 others.
Yeah, we are trapped between 2 different ticking clocks, and the truly alarming part is that they are not synchronized at all.
Right. So let's look at the anatomy of this ceasefire and the deadlines driving the panic in Islamabad.
So the report lays out this timeline, and the first massive date looming over everything is April 21.
Okay.
That is when the 2-week ceasefire, which was brokered by Pakistan and announced just yesterday, formally expires.
Got it. So if the diplomatic team sitting in Islamabad right now fail to produce an agreement or fail to at least, agree on extending the pause by April 21.
We default immediately back to the status quo of April 7.
Meaning the threat to destroy the remaining Iranian power plants, the bridges, the infrastructure, that bombing campaign resumes without warning.
Exactly. And considering the formal talks in Islamabad only began on April 10th or 11th, we are talking about an operational window of roughly 11 days to solve a crisis that has been brewing for 40 years.
11 days. I mean, that's an extraordinarily compressed timeline for any negotiation, let alone one involving, nuclear material and ballistic missiles.
The compression is unprecedented. But the second clock is the one that introduces a completely different vector of pressure. It's a legal boundary.
April 29th.
Right, April 29, dictated by the United States Constitution and federal law.
The War Powers Resolution Clock. So for those who might not be intimately familiar with 1970s congressional legislation, what is this exactly?
So the War Powers Resolution, specifically under 50 U.S.C. Section 1544, was passed in 1973 after the Vietnam War. Congress wanted to ensure the president couldn't just wage open-ended conflicts without legislative approval.
Makes sense.
Right. So the law stipulates that the president must obtain congressional authorization within 60 days of commencing hostilities.
Okay. And Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28.
Exactly. Count 60 days forward from February 28 and you hit April 29.
Wow.
By that date, legally, the president must have a statutory authorization, or he must begin pulling U.S. forces out of combat operations.
But isn't there like an extension or something they usually use?
There is a 30-day extension available, which would push the absolute final deadline to May 29. However, the legislation is incredibly specific about how that extension can be used.
Oh, so?
It is solely for executing an orderly and safe withdrawal of troops. It cannot be used as an umbrella to continue offensive military operations.
Okay, so from a strategic standpoint, April 29 is the hard wall for the current military posture.
Yes.
This creates a really bizarre sequence of events. We have an 8-day gap. The ceasefire ends around April 21. The war powers clock explodes on April 29.
Russo refers to this as a compressive pressure dynamic.
And here is the legal friction that I found absolutely fascinating in the report. A ceasefire does not hit the pause button on the war powers clock, right?
Not at all. The legal timer is entirely blind to the diplomatic developments in Pakistan. A ceasefire, even a highly successful one, does not constitute statutory authorization under the resolution.
The law demands a formal declaration of war or a specific statutory authorization from Congress.
Exactly. Simply having mediators talking in a room in Islamabad does not satisfy the United States Code.
I was trying to visualize the absurdity of this. It's like you're negotiating a high-stakes corporate merger in a rented conference room.
Right.
You have the buyers and sellers at the table. You're hashing out the final share price. Everyone is making great progress. But the building manager is legally required to turn off the lights, cut the power, and lock the doors at midnight.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
The building manager doesn't care if you just need 5 more minutes to sign the papers. The law says the lights go out.
And to take that corporate merger analogy a step further, the board of directors, in this case the U.S. Congress, who need to approve the final merger, aren't even in the building.
Oh, right. Congress is currently on recess.
Yes, they are scattered across the country in their home districts and are not scheduled to return to Washington until approximately April 28.
That is literally 1 day before the war powers clock expires.
Exactly. If the Islamabad's ceasefire collapses on April 24 and the bombing resumes, Congress has exactly 8 days to reconvene, travel back to D.C., draft a war resolution, debate it, and pass it.
Which is just not going to happen. And historical precedent within this very conflict suggests that is highly unlikely.
Very unlikely. The report highlights that the Senate has already rejected war powers resolutions 3 times since Operation Epic Fury began.
Wow. 3 times?
Yeah. And the House has rejected it once. The political appetite for a formal declaration of war is virtually non-existent.
Which raises an important question, though. Does the War Powers Act actually have teeth here?
What do you mean?
Well, we have seen U.S. presidents push the boundaries of this act for decades, right?
Yeah.
Launching airstrikes and maintaining deployments by stretching the definition of hostilities.
Sure, or claiming inherent executive authority.
Right. So is this April 29 deadline a hard brick wall, or is it just a procedural speed bump that the executive branch will, just drive right over?
Well, the CLG report treats April 29 as a hard, binding boundary. They lean heavily on analysis from Paul D. Miller, published in the Dispatch on April 6.
Okay, and what did he say?
Miller articulated clearly that the executive branch has until April 29 to secure authorization, or May 29 to withdraw. And the tangible teeth of this deadline really come down to the power of the purse.
The money.
always the money. There is a $200 billion supplemental appropriations request for the Iran operations currently sitting in limbo.
$200 billion, that's a massive amount of funding.
And the military cannot sustain a high-intensity, multi-theater war of this magnitude, involving massive naval deployments and continuous airstrikes without fresh funding.
And every dollar of that requires an affirmative vote from Congress.
Exactly. Congress's repeated refusal to authorize the war thus far turns April 29 into a financial and legal cliff.
Okay, so we know exactly how little runway we have. 11 days of actual negotiation to beat the April 21 deadline, and an unmoving legal and financial wall on April 29. Very tight. So what exactly is sitting on the table in Islamabad that is so complex it could take more than a week to resolve? Let's dive into the documents themselves. The maximalist opening bids.
Russo's report does a phenomenal job here. He places the two competing frameworks side by side, allowing us to see the vast delta between the two sides.
It's a huge gap. On April 6, Iran's Supreme National Security Council formulated a 10-point framework channeled through Pakistani intermediaries.
Right. And conversely, the U.S. submitted a 15-point action list, also delivered via Pakistan, back around March 25.
Let's start with Iran's 10-point plan. The report categorizes this as their maximalist opening position. Point 1 is a demand for a non-aggression guarantee.
Essentially binding international commitments to prevent any recurrence of this kind of preemptive or retaliatory war.
Makes sense as an opener, but point 2 is where the geopolitical weight really drops. Iran demands sovereign control of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. They explicitly state that safe passage through the strait must be under the coordination of the armed forces of Iran.
Let's pause there and look at the physical geography of the Strait of Hormuz to understand why this is such an enormous demand.
It's crucial context.
Right. The strait is this narrow sliver of water connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. At its narrowest point, it is only about 21 miles wide.
Right.
But the actual shipping lanes, the deep water channels that massive oil tankers must use, are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
With a 2-mile buffer in between.
Exactly. So Iran is basically demanding to be the sole toll booth operator and security guard for a 2-mile wide highway that handles 20% of the world's global oil consumption.
They want the keys to the global energy market. And that demand directly contravenes international maritime law, specifically transit passage under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Which the U.S. enforces rigorously.
Absolutely. Moving to point 3, Iran demands the formal acceptance of their right to enrich uranium.
Oh, we will definitely dive into the incredible nuances of how this specific demand was communicated shortly.
Yeah, it is a masterclass in diplomatic theater.
For sure. Points 4 and 5 focus on the economic chokehold. They demand the total removal of all primary and secondary sanctions.
And secondary sanctions are the real weapon here.
Right. Primary sanctions mean U.S. companies can't do business with Iran. But secondary sanctions mean the U.S. will penalize any company in the world, like a French bank or a Japanese shipping firm, if they do business with Iran.
It effectively cuts Iran out of the global financial system completely. They want those entirely dismantled.
Point 6 demands the termination of all UN Security Council resolutions targeting Iran.
Essentially wiping the international legal slate clean.
And point 7 pairs with that, demanding the termination of all IAEA Board of Governors resolutions condemning their nuclear program.
Then we get to point 8, the demand for full payment of war damages and reparations.
Covering destroyed infrastructure, civilian casualties, economic losses. Considering the sheer volume of ordnance dropped over 40 days, we are talking about an astronomical financial figure.
Unimaginable amounts of money. Point 9 demands the withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from all regional bases and deployment points.
And point 10 is the demand for a cessation of hostilities on all fronts. This explicitly ties the bilateral U.S.-Iran conflict to the broader regional proxy network.
Right. Iran insists the ceasefire must cover Lebanon with Hezbollah, Yemen with the Houthis, and Iraq with the Shia militias, an all-encompassing end to the regional architecture of the war.
Now, looking at the public posturing around this 10-point plan, Iran is projecting absolute rigidity, right?
Complete inflexibility. The report quotes Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi speaking to Iranian state media in late March.
What did he say?
He said, "We do not want a ceasefire. We want the war to end in a way that it does not repeat, on our own terms."
And the deputy parliament speaker went on television and declared there would be absolutely no agreement if all 10 conditions weren't met.
Specifically noting that the new supreme leader had personally authorized them as red lines.
Right. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, he's operating under immense domestic pressure, isn't he?
He is. He was elevated to the position on March 8 following the death of his father, Ali Khamenei, who was killed during the opening U.S. strikes on February 28.
So as a newly installed leader overseeing a country under heavy bombardment, projecting anything less than absolute, unyielding strength would be politically fatal for him.
Exactly. He is using this 10-point plan to consolidate power and demonstrate resolve to the Iranian populace and the hardline military establishment.
So that is Iran's opening salvo. Let's flip the table and look at the U.S. 15-point plan from March 25.
Russo notes that the full text of this document was never officially published by the State Department, but major news outlets reconstructed the parameters based on intelligence leaks.
And the U.S. framework is equally maximalist. Point 1 requires an immediate 30-day ceasefire to create the space to negotiate a comprehensive agreement.
Point 2 strikes at the heart of the conflict, demanding the complete dismantling of the nuclear facilities at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow.
Dismantling, that's huge. Point 3 is a permanent, binding commitment from Iran to never develop nuclear weapons.
Point 4 is the physical handover of their existing enriched uranium stockpile to the IAEA under an agreed-upon timeline.
Point 5 is the cessation of all uranium enrichment on Iranian soil. Zero enrichment. A completely uncompromising stance.
Point 6 reinforces this by demanding full IAEA access and verification.
I read this part and realized it mentioned the additional protocol. Let's clarify what that actually means on the ground.
It's really important. Normally, the IAEA can only inspect declared nuclear sites, places Iran voluntarily says, yes, we are doing nuclear research here.
Right, but the additional protocol gives them sweeping authority.
Exactly. Short notice authority to inspect undeclared sites. If they suspect a covert facility is hidden inside a military base, the additional protocol gives them the legal framework to knock on the door and demand entry.
It is the ultimate transparency mechanism, and Iran suspended its compliance with it years ago. The U.S. wants it permanently reinstated.
Point 7 broadens the scope to regional security, demanding Iran abandon the proxy paradigm entirely. They must cease funding, arming, and directing Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, and Iraqi militias.
Point 8 demands the Strait of Hormuz be permanently open as a free maritime corridor, directly rejecting Iran's demand for sovereign control.
Point 9 demands strict limits on the ballistic missile program, restricting both the range and the quantity Iran can possess.
Point 10 limits the use of those missiles strictly to self-defense. Point 11 demands Iran cease exporting the revolution and stop interfering in the domestic politics of Gulf states.
And Point 12 introduces a massive ideological hurdle, demanding Iran formally acknowledge Israel's right to exist.
That is a staggering list of demands that essentially require the complete dismantling of Iran's foreign policy from the last 40 years.
It really is. But the U.S. document does present a few significant carrots at the end of the stick. Point 13 offers the lifting of all sanctions, primary, secondary, and energy-related.
And Point 14 is a fascinating, highly specific offer. The U.S. is offering assistance to advance Iran's civilian nuclear program, specifically at the Bushehr nuclear power plant.
And the kicker is, they are offering to provide the nuclear fuel for that civilian plant for free for a long period of time.
We will definitely circle back to why that free fuel offer is such a crucial piece of leverage.
And finally, Point 15 offers the removal of the snapback mechanism, permanently disabling the automatic reimposition of UN sanctions.
Okay, for anyone who doesn't spend their weekends reading UN Security Council bylaws, let's unpack snapback.
Please do.
Normally, if the UN wants to sanction a country, any permanent member of the Security Council, like Russia or China, can veto the resolution. Iran relies heavily on Russian and Chinese vetoes for protection.
Right.
Snapback flips the script. It was a mechanism built into the 2015 nuclear deal where any single participant could claim a violation, and the old, crushing UN sanctions automatically snap back into place, and that action cannot be vetoed.
It's a geopolitical kill switch. So the U.S. offering to remove it permanently is a massive concession regarding Iran's future economic security.
Looking at these two massive lists of demands, they seem entirely incompatible.
On paper, yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It is classic real estate negotiation strategy. Publicly, the seller says, I won't accept a single penny under my asking price, and absolutely no, you cannot have the vintage refrigerator.
Right.
Meanwhile, privately, their real estate agent is texting your agent saying, look, they're flexible on the price, and honestly, they hate that fridge anyway. They just want to feel like they won something.
That's exactly what's happening. The CLG report highlights some incredible discrepancies between the public posturing and the private flexibility in Islamabad.
This is where meticulous documentary analysis reveals the true state of play. Russo's report identifies a brilliant maneuver that we can call the Farsi translation trick.
Oh, this is great. Let's look closely at Iran's point 3, the demand for the formal acceptance of Iran's right to enrich uranium. Russo reveals that this non-negotiable demand was present in the original Farsi language version of the 10-point plan published in Tehran.
Okay.
However, it was notably absent from the English language versions that were discreetly handed over to the Western mediators in Pakistan. A U.S. nuclear expert even confirmed this glaring discrepancy on April 7.
So why do that? Why include your most vital red line nuclear demand in one language and completely scrub it from the translation you hand to the people you are negotiating with?
Deliberate ambiguity. It is a masterful piece of diplomatic theater.
Oh, I see.
It allows the Iranian leadership to go on state television, point directly to the Farsi document, and tell their domestic audience, look, we are standing strong. We are demanding our sovereign right to enrich uranium.
But by omitting it from the English version on the table in Islamabad,
they are quietly signaling to the American and European negotiators, we know zero enrichment is your red line. This point is negotiable. We aren't going to blow up the ceasefire talks over this specific phrasing.
That is wild. It allows them to project absolute strength at home while maintaining functional flexibility abroad.
Exactly. And the United States is playing an almost identical game with its own internal documents, aren't they?
They really are. The public posture of the United States, reiterated loudly by former President Trump on social media on April 8, is entirely uncompromising.
Right. He wrote, "There will be no enrichment of uranium," with a capital U for emphasis.
The public narrative is that the U.S. will dig up and remove all buried nuclear material, zero tolerance.
However, Russo notes that a later internal version of the U.S. 15-point plan reportedly softened that stance significantly.
It allowed for limited enrichment until a regional consortium facility becomes operational.
That is a massive shift in policy. Going from zero enrichment ever, we will dismantle everything, to we will tolerate limited enrichment until we can build a shared regional facility, is the difference between an immediate breakdown in talks and finding a viable path forward.
It really proves that despite the fiery public rhetoric, Iran dismissing the U.S. plan as not beautiful, even on paper, the private channels are exploring actual compromises.
Even Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister who publicly stated they didn't want a ceasefire, quietly confirmed on April 8 that Washington had accepted the general framework of Iran's 10-point proposal as a basis for negotiations.
The public theater is hostile, but the private mechanics are functional.
Exactly.
Okay, so having seen the two extreme opening bids and knowing that both sides are secretly texting their agents that they are willing to deal, how do the diplomats actually build a bridge in 11 days?
Well, Russo's report includes a section called the gap analysis, where he maps these two frameworks against each other to see what is structurally possible in the time remaining.
And the analysis breaks the negotiation down into 3 distinct buckets, right? Bridgeable issues, medium difficulty issues, and hard issues.
Yes. Looking at what falls into which bucket gives us the blueprint for how this tight window might play out.
Let's start with the bridgeable bucket. What can these opposing sides actually agree on quickly to build momentum and avoid the resumption of the bombing campaign?
Surprisingly, the most critical choke point on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz, is considered bridgeable.
Really? Because Iran wants sovereign control and the U.S. wants it permanently open. The gap seems insurmountable on paper.
It does. But the bridge path identified in the report relies on the exact template currently being used to maintain the 2-week ceasefire, reopening the strait under the coordination of the Iranian armed forces, but formalized with Omani co-management.
Oman is fascinating here. They share the Strait of Hormuz with Iran. Oman is on the southern side, Iran is on the northern side.
Right.
Oman has historically played the Switzerland of the Middle East, maintaining quiet, functional relations with both Washington and Tehran.
So the solution is a permanent transit protocol with notification requirements and a dispute mechanism overseen by Oman. This benefits both parties economically.
It gives Iran the cosmetic appearance of sovereign oversight, allowing them to claim victory.
While the U.S. and the global markets get the guarantee that the 15 million barrels of oil start flowing again under Omani observation.
That's brilliant. The second major bridgeable issue is the civilian nuclear program, right? Point 14 of the U.S. plan.
Yes, the offer to provide free civilian fuel for the Bushehr plant. Russo notes that even before Operation Epic Fury began, Iran was actively seeking international contracts for 19 new nuclear reactors and secure fuel supplies.
So the U.S. is stepping in and offering exactly what Iran wants for its civilian energy infrastructure.
By offering free fuel, the U.S. removes Iran's stated justification for needing domestic enrichment capabilities. It's an area of genuine convergence that can anchor early goodwill in the talks.
Moving to the medium bucket, this is where the diplomacy starts to look heavily reliant on semantics and PR spin.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's look at Iran's point 8, the demand for full payment of war damages and reparations.
Right. Given the political climate in the United States, especially heading into an election cycle, an administration handing a giant treasury check labeled reparations to Iran is a complete non-starter. It would be political suicide.
Completely impossible.
So I was reading this section and thinking, is international diplomacy really just an expensive game of passing a thesaurus back and forth?
In many critical ways, yes. The language dictates the political survivability of the deal.
So how do they fix the reparations issue?
The report outlines the diplomatic sleight of hand required. You absolutely do not call it reparations. You rebrand it as a reconstruction investment fund.
Okay, a fund.
Furthermore, you do not appropriate a single new dollar of U.S. taxpayer money. Instead, the U.S. facilitates the unfreezing of the $6 billion plus in existing Iranian assets that are currently locked up in banks in South Korea, Qatar, and Europe due to sanctions.
So the solution is returning Iran's own money to them under a humanitarian banner of reconstruction rather than admitting fault through reparations.
Precisely. This allows both sides to declare total victory to their respective audiences.
Iran's leadership can broadcast, "We forced the Americans to release billions of dollars to rebuild our bombed infrastructure."
Meanwhile, the U.S. administration can go before Congress and the public and state, "We did not pay them a single dime in reparations. We simply allowed them access to their own previously frozen accounts, strictly for humanitarian rebuilding efforts."
Saving face domestically is often the heaviest anchor in international negotiations.
It really is. Another issue in the medium bucket is Iran's point 9, the demand for the withdrawal of U.S. combat forces.
The report points out a very clever omission by Iran here. They deliberately left the term combat forces undefined.
Yes.
Why is that lack of definition so useful for a mediator?
Because rigidity creates zero-sum games. If you define combat forces as every single U.S. military uniform in the region, someone has to lose completely. By keeping it vague, the report suggests mediators can define combat forces incredibly narrowly. The U.S. could agree to a minor reduction of active forward-deployed offensive assets, say moving an aircraft carrier group slightly out of the immediate theater.
Or they could simply redesignate existing bases.
Exactly.
I see. You take an active U.S. base, swap out the signage, and suddenly it's a joint use facility or a training and logistics hub.
And Iran goes to the press and claims, "We successfully forced the withdrawal of U.S. combat forces."
While the United States quietly maintains its logistical footprint, intelligence gathering, and deterrence infrastructure under a different administrative classification.
It's brilliant in a deeply cynical way. It is the mechanical essence of finding a negotiated settlement. You alter the form while preserving the function.
But that brings us to the hard bucket. These are the issues that cannot be solved by swapping out words in a thesaurus or changing the signage on a military base.
Right. The ballistic missiles and the acknowledgement of Israel.
The U.S. Point 9 demands strict, verifiable limits on Iran's ballistic missile program in both range and quantity.
And Iran hasn't even acknowledged missiles in their 10-point plan. From their perspective, their missile deterrent is categorically off the table for negotiation.
Then you have U.S. Point 12, the demand that Iran formally acknowledge Israel's right to exist. Ideologically and constitutionally, Iran rejects this outright.
So how does Russo's gap analysis suggest that diplomats in Islamabad bridge these completely unbridgeable gaps in the next 11 days?
That's the big question.
The stark recommendation is that they don't even try.
They just ignore them.
The only viable path is to defer them entirely. You amputate these issues from the current negotiation and kick them to a phase 2 or a vague, medium-term regional architecture discussion.
Is there a precedent for that?
Yes, there is historical precedent. The 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal deferred the issue of ballistic missiles entirely to get the nuclear limits signed. Russo argues this template must be reused. The negotiators might achieve a simple non-use pledge, like Iran agreeing only to use missiles defensively. But quantitative limits and the ideological recognition of Israel cannot be resolved before the April 21 deadline.
Because if you try to force those issues into the Phase 1 agreement...
The ceasefire collapses immediately. The primary directive right now is to save the ceasefire.
Okay, so we just discussed deferring the hard issues, kicking the can down the road on missiles in Israel. But there is one hard issue that absolutely cannot be deferred.
The payload itself.
Yes. The issue that sits at the burning center of this entire 40-day conflict, the nuclear material. We need to look at the physical reality on the ground. Because the numbers Russo lays out regarding the bombardment and the uranium stockpiles are staggering.
The physical reality after 6 weeks of war is grim. Before Operation Epic Fury commenced, the IAEA assessed that Iran held approximately 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium.
Let's contextualize what 60% enrichment actually means. Natural uranium pulled out of the ground contains less than 1% of the U-235 isotope, which is what you need for a reaction.
Right.
To make fuel for a civilian power plant, you spin that uranium gas in centrifuges until it reaches about 3 to 5% enrichment.
Okay.
To make a nuclear weapon, you need it enriched to roughly 90%. 60% is highly enriched, but it's not quite a bomb. However, the physics of enrichment are nonlinear.
What does that mean in practice?
Getting from natural uranium to 5% takes a massive amount of time and effort. But once you hit 60%, the leap to 90% weapons grade takes almost no time at all. You are practically on the finish line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The effort is measured in separative work units, and the vast majority of the work is already done by the time you reach 60%.
So 440 kilograms is a lot.
It is. To put that 440 kilograms in context, Russo's report cites the Center for Arms Control, noting that this stockpile represents enough material for approximately 9 to 10 plus nuclear warheads if it is further enriched to 90%.
And the IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi spoke to Al Jazeera and stated it could yield more than 10 nuclear warheads.
And neutralizing that specific stockpile of material was the primary stated objective of the U.S. military campaign.
The scale of Operation Epic Fury is difficult to comprehend. CNCOM reports that by day 33 of the conflict, over 12,300 Iranian targets had been struck by U.S. and allied forces.
12,300 targets. Yeah. The logistical coordination for a bombing campaign of that magnitude is staggering.
And we must talk about the human toll of this operation, which the report details impartially. Regardless of which side's numbers you look at, the verified casualty figures as of April 8 are heartbreaking.
Russo relies on multiple cross-reference trackers to maintain neutrality here. Within Iran, the independent HRNA Human Rights Tracker lists 3,597 killed, which tragically includes over 1,600 civilians. Meanwhile, the opposition outlet Iran International claims that over 4,700 IRGC and security forces were killed in the strikes. The Iranian Health Ministry reports that the healthcare system is overwhelmed with over 26,500 wounded.
On the United States side, CENTCOM has confirmed 13 service members killed in action. The wounded figures are officially reported at 373 plus.
Though Russo notes an article from The Intercept suggesting the Pentagon may be undercounting the wounded by excluding casualties stemming from a major fire aboard the aircraft carrier USS Ford.
And the devastation has bled far past the U.S. and Iranian borders. In Lebanon, prior to the events of April 8, the Lebanese Health Ministry reported over 1,400 killed and 4,600 wounded from Israeli strikes.
With 1.2 million people internally displaced, that is roughly 20% of Lebanon's entire population forced from their homes.
In Israel, Al Jazeera tracks 26 plus killed and over 7,100 wounded from retaliatory strikes. The Gulf states, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE have all suffered casualties and infrastructure damage from Iranian missile strikes aimed at U.S. bases within their borders.
We also have to zoom out to the global toll. The World Food Program is projecting that 45 million people will be pushed into acute, life-threatening hunger if oil stays over $100 a barrel and the fighting disrupts shipping past mid-2026.
UNICEF has confirmed over 760 schools destroyed and 442 health facilities severely damaged across the region. The scale of the destruction is overwhelming.
It is. But amidst all of this bombing, all of these 12,300 precision strikes meant to neutralize the nuclear threat, Russo's report presents a terrifying paradox.
Yes, this is crucial.
What's fascinating here is when you look at the physical reality of the nuclear stockpile post-bombardment, the military campaign actually made the nuclear material significantly harder to find and monitor.
Let me see if I have this straight. We launched a massive operation, dropped tens of thousands of munitions specifically to stop a nuclear program, and the end result is that we actually have less visibility into that program than when we started on February 28.
That is the exact paradox Russo highlights.
How is that possible?
The report quotes a detailed analysis from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Their assessment suggests that well before the intense strikes of June 2025 and the subsequent February 2026 campaign, Iran likely moved a significant portion, if not the entirety, of that 440 kilograms of enriched uranium deep underground.
Underground where?
The likely location is the heavily fortified subterranean mountain complexes in Isfahan. These are facilities buried so deep beneath solid rock that they survive the immense bombardment of Operation Epic Fury.
Unbelievable.
Furthermore, because of the hostilities, the IAEA has been completely locked out of Iran since June 2025. They have absolutely zero verification capability regarding the current location, status, or enrichment level of that stockpile.
So the uranium is safely hidden under a mountain, the international inspectors are flying blind, and U.S. intelligence assesses that Iran still retains 50% of its mobile missile launchers and 50% of its drone capabilities.
Right. The Soufan Center essentially argues that despite taking a horrific beating, Iran is perfectly positioned geographically and militarily to fight a brutal, grinding war of attrition.
So how on earth do the negotiators in Islamabad solve the nuclear issue in Phase 1 if we can't even see the uranium?
The physical reality dictates the diplomatic solution. You cannot bomb the uranium because it's too deep. And demanding that Iran physically pack up 440 kilograms of their most prized strategic asset and ship it to a third country is politically impossible.
Because it would be broadcast globally as a total humiliating surrender.
Exactly. So Russo outlines a highly technical, face-saving off-ramp, zero net enrichment, coupled with diluting the uranium in place.
This concept of zero net enrichment completely blew my mind when I read it. It's basically putting the Iranian nuclear scientists on a chemical treadmill.
That's a perfect way to describe it. The concept originates from nuclear policy expert Mark Goodman. It is designed to solve the political problem of enrichment.
So how does it work?
It allows Iran to operate limited centrifuge cascades. The machines keep spinning, the scientists keep working, and the Iranian government can broadcast footage to their public proving that they are still enriching uranium, maintaining their sovereign pride.
But structurally, they're required to immediately blend the enriched output back down to natural uranium levels.
Right. The centrifuges run continuously, but the usable enriched stockpile never actually grows. The net enrichment is zero.
It's diplomatic theater powered by advanced chemistry. I love it. But what about the 440 kilos of 60% highly enriched material already sitting inside the mountain in Isfahan? The treadmill stops them from making more, but the 10 warheads worth of material is still there.
This is where in-place dilution comes in. Rather than moving the material to Russia or Oman, which triggers that surrender narrative, you keep it inside Iran.
But under strict, continuous IAEA supervision, Iranian scientists mix that 60% material with natural or depleted uranium, chemically downblending it to below 5% enrichment.
Exactly. And downblending isn't just mixing two liquids together. Once you dilute the U-235 concentration, separating it back out to 60% takes just as much time and energy as doing it the first time.
You are chemically erasing the progress.
You render the material useless for a weapon. IAEA Director General Grossi practically laid out this exact off-ramp when he publicly stated, the material will still be there. Perhaps some infrastructure will still be there.
It's a profound compromise. It satisfies the core U.S. security demand for verifiable safety by eliminating the weapons-grade stockpile, and it satisfies Iran's core political need to avoid the humiliation of surrendering their material to a foreign power.
Now, the physical and diplomatic puzzles are incredibly complex, but we have to remember they aren't happening in a vacuum. This isn't just a two-player board game between Washington and Tehran.
Right. Who are the people actually pulling the strings in the rooms in Islamabad? We need to look at the chessboard of mediators and, critically, the spoilers who are actively trying to flip the board over.
Russo provides a fascinating breakdown of the cast of characters involved in this 8-day sprint. Let's start with the primary host and mediator, Pakistan.
Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir are the architects who actually brokered the 90-minute ceasefire that saved the Iranian grid, right?
Yes. They're currently hosting the talks. Pakistan is the indispensable channel here because they possess a unique geopolitical overlap. They share a massive, porous border with Iran. They're a nuclear-armed Islamic state, and they maintain deep historic military and economic ties with the United States.
They have credibility with both Washington and Tehran that no European nation currently possesses.
Exactly. And looking at the delegations they are hosting, the Iranian team is led by Parliament Speaker Mohammed Baker Qualibaf.
And the U.S. delegation is heavily stacked, led by Vice President JD Vance, alongside Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The report notes an interesting detail. Iran reportedly preferred dealing with Vance rather than Witkoff,
which speaks to the intense interpersonal dynamics at play. Working alongside Pakistan in a supporting role is what the report calls the regional troika: Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar.
Didn't they propose something earlier?
Yeah, earlier in the conflict, they proposed a 45-day phase ceasefire. Iran rejected it at the time, but the structural architecture of their proposal is still heavily influencing the current talks.
And then you have Oman, which, as we discussed, is acting as the crucial back channel, quietly hammering out the joint maritime protocol for the Strait of Hormuz.
But the Gulf states are also major, highly motivated stakeholders here. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain. They aren't just neutral observers.
Right. They were directly struck by Iranian retaliatory missiles during this conflict. The UAE was so infuriated by the strikes that they recalled their ambassador from Tehran and completely closed their embassy.
They are aggressively insisting that any settlement in Islamabad must permanently address the Iranian missile threats directed at their infrastructure. They aren't going to sit by quietly if a U.S.-Iran deal ignores Gulf security.
They are applying immense pressure behind the scenes. But while the Gulf states are pushing for broader security guarantees, Russo identifies one principal spoiler that has the kinetic potential to entirely collapse the Islamabad talks before April 21.
Israel.
Yes. Let's look at the timeline of events on April 8th, the very day after the 90-minute ceasefire was announced.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement explicitly declaring that the ceasefire brokered in Pakistan does not include Lebanon.
And immediately following that statement, Israel launched Operation Eternal Darkness.
Russo notes this operation involved the largest wave of Israeli airstrikes into Lebanon since March 2, resulting in over 254 people killed in a single day.
I read that Israeli opposition leaders are publicly calling this operation the worst diplomatic disaster in Israel's history. Because how does dropping bombs in Beirut impact the negotiators sitting in a room in Islamabad?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shatters the foundational requirement of Iran's position. If you look back at Iran's 10-point plan, Point 10 demands an all-front cessation of hostilities.
This explicitly includes Lebanon and Hezbollah.
Yes. Iran's entire strategic doctrine is built around the axis of resistance. They insist that any bilateral agreement with the U.S. must cover all associated theaters of war.
So the mechanical problem there is, how do you mediate a bilateral ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran when a heavily involved third party, Israel, who isn't even at the table in Islamabad, is actively bombing one of the primary fronts that Iran demands be protected?
You structurally cannot. Not within a single, unified negotiating track.
Yeah.
The Israeli strikes directly threaten the survivability of Point 10.
And if Israel continues to pound Lebanon, Iran has publicly stated it may retaliate by reclosing the Strait of Hormuz.
If Hormuz closes, the oil stops flowing, the global markets crash, and the entire United States incentive for maintaining the ceasefire evaporates. The whole architecture collapses.
So what is Russo's solution for neutralizing this spoiler effect in the remaining days?
The immediate creation of a completely separate, parallel Lebanon track.
Mediated by Qatar, right?
Yes. Qatar must rapidly broker a separate trilateral understanding between the U.S., Israel, and Iran regarding a ceasefire specifically for the Lebanese border.
Crucially, this track must have different monitors and different structural guarantees than the primary Iran bilateral talks.
Exactly.
I see. This parallel track isn't just about stopping the bombs in Lebanon. It's about providing the Iranian delegation with a vital political cover.
Right. If Qatar can quiet the Lebanese front, Iran can go back to its hardliners in Tehran and say, look, we secured peace and protection for Hezbollah through the Qatari track, so we can now safely sign off on the nuclear concessions in the Pakistani track without looking like we abandoned our allies.
It decouples the two crises just enough to let the main deal breathe.
It is diplomatic triage. You isolate the bleeding so you can operate on the heart.
Wow. We've seen the unmoving deadlines, the extreme maximalist demands, the staggering physical destruction, the hidden uranium paradox, and the spoilers actively dropping bombs.
It's a lot to process.
Now, what is the actual blueprint to survive the next 8 to 13 days? Let's walk through the CLG report's ultimate mediator recommendation, the 3-phase roadmap.
Phase 1 is strictly about immediate survival. This is the triage phase, and it absolutely has to be agreed upon by April 21.
The goal here isn't a final historic peace treaty. The goal is simply extending the ceasefire so the April 29 war powers clock doesn't trigger a constitutional crisis in Washington or a resumption of the bombing campaign.
Precisely.
So what are the specific, achievable elements of Phase 1?
Russo outlines 4 essential pillars. First, keep the Strait of Hormuz open using the Omani co-management protocol. Get the oil moving immediately.
Right. Second, implement a strict IAEA-supervised freeze on the enriched uranium stockpile. No moving the material, no further enrichment, just freeze it in place.
Third, establish that parallel Lebanon ceasefire track mediated by Qatar to neutralize the Israeli spoiler effect. And fourth, a mutual non-escalation pledge covering all regional theaters.
And the report emphasizes heavily that the Lebanon track is the most urgent, fragile part of Phase 1. If the Qatari track fails, Hezbollah fires rockets, Israel responds, Iran closes Hormuz, and we are back to April 7.
It all unravels.
But assuming they can hold that delicate balance and survive Phase 1, what happens in Phase 2? Russo says this needs to happen within 14 days of the initial agreement.
Phase 2 tackles the core nuclear framework. This relies on what the report calls a JCPOA plus baseline.
For context, the JCPOA was the 2015 nuclear deal.
Exactly. The baseline here means re-implementing those structural caps. You strictly cap enrichment levels at 3.67%, you cap the total stockpile of enriched material at 300 kilograms, and you force Iran to re-implement the IAEA additional protocol to allow for snap inspections of undeclared sites.
And this is where that zero-net enrichment treadmill concept comes into play to satisfy the domestic politics in Tehran, and the in-place chemical dilution of the 60% stockpile happens under the watchful eye of the IAEA.
Right.
What about the heavily damaged facilities at Natanz and Fordo?
The U.S. demands that those specific facilities be verifiably closed and sealed by inspectors before any major structural sanctions relief begins. Once the immediate nuclear threat is frozen and chemically diluted, the negotiations transition to Phase 3.
The medium term. This is where the diplomats finally deal with the hard bucket we discussed earlier.
Right, the deferrals. This is where the semantics come back into play. You implement the Reconstruction Investment Fund by slowly unfreezing the $6 billion plus in locked assets to satisfy Iran's demand for reparations.
And you define combat forces as narrowly as possible and agree to a phased cosmetic reduction of offensive forward-deployed assets.
I think the most vital part of synthesizing this entire report, the core thesis of how these diplomats get out of this room alive, comes from a quote by Trita Parsi at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, which Russo features prominently in the text.
What's the quote?
Parsi wrote,
Yeah.
Trump's failed use of force has blunted the credibility of American military threats. The United States is no longer in a position to dictate terms. Any agreement will have to rest on genuine compromise.
That is a profound grounding observation for this entire crisis. The 8-day window we are obsessing over isn't about solving 40 years of deep-seated geopolitical, religious, and economic tension. That is impossible.
It is strictly about stopping the immediate bleeding before the April 29 war powers clock blows up the legal framework that allows the U.S. military to even operate.
When you look at the physical reality, neither side achieved its stated military objectives. Iran's infrastructure is severely degraded, and its economy is suffocating.
And the United States is hemorrhaging money, facing an uncooperative Congress, and staring down global economic fury over $117 a barrel oil.
Absolute victory is off the table for both parties. Genuine, painful compromise is the only mechanical way out of the trap.
Exactly.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started at the terrifying 90-minute deadline yesterday that literally saved the Iranian power grid from annihilation.
Yeah, we did.
We dug into the bizarre, high-stakes, semantic games of international diplomacy, where an English translation omitting a single phrase can save a negotiation, where reparations magically become reconstruction, and where combat forces are redefined to mean whatever the politicians need them to mean.
We talked about a mountain complex in Isfahan holding enough hidden uranium for 10 warheads, the chemical treadmill of zero-net enrichment, and the frantic race against an unmoving constitutional clock in Washington.
When you lay it all out like that, it highlights how incredibly fragile the complex systems governing the globe truly are.
It really does.
And I want to remind you, the listener, why these incredibly dense diplomatic machinations matter to you right now. When you go to the gas station this week, when you look at the skyrocketing price of goods shipped across the ocean, your daily life, your budget is being dictated by these nuances.
Global supply chains and international stability are currently hinging on whether an English translation matches a Farsi document.
Your gas prices depend on whether a Qatari diplomat can stop an Israeli bombing campaign in Lebanon fast enough to keep an Iranian general from closing a 21-mile strait in Oman. That is the razor's edge of interconnectedness we are living on today.
The interconnectedness is absolute, and the margins for error have vanished entirely.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a deep, unexplored question that builds on the text we just dissected. We focused intensely today on the legal friction between military action and the U.S. constitutional war powers clock.
Right.
But think about this structurally. We live in an era of hyper-fast ballistic missiles that cross continents in minutes, drone-assisted warfare, and immediate cascading global economic collapse.
The speed of war has fundamentally changed.
Exactly. If the speed of a modern 21st century conflict fundamentally outpaces the literal ability of a legislature to return from a scheduled recess, sit in a room and vote, is the 20th century legal architecture of declaring war fundamentally obsolete?
Are we trying to regulate a microchip with a steam engine?
Exactly. It's a chilling thought, and one that every democracy is going to have to reckon with. Think about that the next time you look at a geopolitical deadline counting down on your screen. We'll be keeping a very close eye on the rooms in Islamabad over these next 13 days. Until next time, keep questioning the surface narrative, look for the missing translations, and thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.